My name is Arlene Herson. The name of the show is Getting to Know You, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Tonight, we're going to get to know a man who has been on television longer than anybody. As a matter of fact, he is in the Guinness Book of Records as having the longest television show ever. For 35 years, he has interviewed the famous and the not-so-famous. He has interviewed almost everybody, including Ronald Reagan in his Death Valley days, Bing Crosby, Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler, Robert Redford, and Woody Allen, just to name a few. He turned his hobby of collecting into a career, and with Joe Franklin's Memory Lane has brought the richness of nostalgia into our homes. Stories and people that would have long ago been forgotten come to life again in his books, on his radio program, and on television. He himself has become as famous as some of his guests. He is Joe Franklin, and let's get to know him right after these messages, so please stay right there. We're back. We're with my very special guest, Joe Franklin. Thank you very much for taking time to be on the show.
It's my very special privilege to be with you, Arlene. I've been a fan for a long time.
Okay, now, you know, the roles are reversed. And here you are, sitting in a chair, being interviewed. How does it feel?
You are interviewing the interviewer, right? And
right.
I enjoy it. I'd like to someday organize a school and just teach people to be interviewers. I know one of the greatest compliments that I get, Arlene, is when I meet kids who go to radio and TV school, and they tell me that their homework is to go home and study Joe Franklin's technique. I always feel overwhelmed with pride when I hear that, because so far as I'm concerned, I have no technique. I think part of the secret is just talk like you're looking in my eyes now. The whole thing is eye contact. So many people, you see them on TV, they're looking at somebody's nose or their belly button or their forehead, but what you're doing now, I think, is the whole secret. Just be honest and look in the eyes.
You know, that's interesting. Also, when you say a school for television interviews, you didn't go to school, neither did I. I think it's something that you'd have to have a natural instinct for.
You got to be born somewhat with that, of course, just like people like Kate Smith or Ethel Merman never took singing lessons. You got to, but to refine it and hone it and repolish it can't be bad.
Well, whatever you've been doing right. 35 years, as I mentioned in the introduction. Longest show on television ever. You're in the Guinness Book of Records. Again, as I mentioned, you've interviewed more than 75,000 people.
I would say by now, not only the longest running TV show in TV, but maybe by now 100,000 guests since the Guinness Book was printed a couple years ago. And what I'm proudest of is the fact that most of those names you mentioned before, Woody Allen, Barbra Streisand, Flip Wilson, Bette Midler, Bill Cosby, 100 more like that. Not only did I have them on my show, but I gave them their first TV exposure ever. They were just unknowns when I put them on. I didn't have them on to capitalize on their fame. I had them on when I spotted a certain kind of charisma when they were young and broke.
True, okay, and a lot of them are not, certainly not young, but not broke and done very well. But why? Why have you been so successful? 35 years, so many shows have come and gone. Why do you think you've been so popular?
Well, you're right, though, about the mortality rate. I was looking in Broadcasting Magazine recently. There was a list of 400 talk shows that have come and gone in the Big Apple, Garden State, Connecticut area since I began. 400. So I think part of the secret, if there's a secret, there's a couple secrets. First of all, I try not to be a wise guy. I try not to ask so-called wise guy or smart-ass kind of questions. You know, I try to put myself in the position of the people at home who just ask nice things. And the second thing is to defy. Whenever you get a big star, they always warn you, Arlene, what not to talk about. Whatever they want me not to talk about is what I do. I had Shirley Temple on, and they said, Joe, you talk about her old movies, she gets up and she walks away. She's on for Biafra, for United Nations, for penal reform, air pollution. But I said to myself, how could I not talk to Shirley Temple about her old movies? I did a whole hour on her old movies, and she loved it. Went back to Hollywood, sent me one of her old scrapbooks, which is priceless. I had Jane Wyman on. She wanted to talk about her very dear friend, Rosalind Russell, who had died of cancer, and a little tribute for the Arthritis Fund. And they said, don't mention Ronald Reagan. I said, how can you not talk about the president? To myself, I said that. We did 45 minutes talking about Ronald Reagan. She loved it. No matter who you... When I had on... who was married to Robert Goulet?
Carol Lawrence. I've interviewed both of them, as a matter of fact. And I was told not to talk
really,
either
right?
one of them about
What'd you do? What'd you do?
Okay, you know, interestingly...
You defied them.
No, Carol Lawrence talked about Robert Goulet
really?
Very lovingly, you know, kind of talked about the problems they had. I did not talk about Carol Lawrence with Robert Goulet, though.
I had Ruby Keeler. You know, she had a very famous breakup with Al Jolson. They says, don't mention Jolson to Ruby Keeler. But I'm a Jolson fanatic. Did a whole hour on Jolson. She loved it.
Okay, but, that worked for you. There are sometimes people have walked off your show that it didn't work for you.
I've had maybe 11 people got up and walked away. They didn't like me. Out of 100,000, 11 is not a bad average. But in every case, they came back later on. Rosemary Clooney, John Gavin, Ernest Borgnine, late actor Robert Strauss.
But Jerry Lewis walked off
Jerry
the show.
Lewis, he took a punch at me. Yeah, he took a punch because
What happened?
It was just, I guess he was a little bit irritable that one. I asked him, I said, Jerry, do you talk to your old partner once in a while? He said, don't you read the papers? He said, no wonder they call you the nostalgia kid. He said, we broke up 10 years ago. It was like waving a red flag. He wasn't in a good mood that day. So he took a swing, but the camera pulled away, and we faded to a commercial.
Okay, tell me, is it true, when you're interviewing all of these famous people, we've only touched on some of them, is it true that you're sitting behind your desk without any shoes on?
I always take off my shoes, yeah.
That's incredible.
Because I relax, I wiggle my toes, and sometimes I take off my socks. I could take off my pants. A lot of people don't even know that I can walk. I always get mail. They say, Joe, you're generally sitting down. Do you walk? I walk a lot, but I'm so used to sitting down, and I'm more at ease that way. Once in a while, I stand up, but very seldom.
Okay, but it's interesting to think that you're sitting behind there with Robert Redford or the former President of the United States, and you're not wearing any shoes. The show is working. In 35 years, has it changed much?
No, it's still nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball. And it clicks. As you were hinting about a school, with all these cable stations opening up today, there'll be a lot of opportunities for talk show hosts. I intend eventually go behind the scenes and create new Arlene Hersons, new Joe Franklins. I think it's going to be a burgeoning field.
Yeah, I agree with you. How has Joe Franklin changed in the past 35 years being on television, the exposure you've had to the people, the things you've learned from your guests?
I've gotten taller, I've gotten slimmer. No, I would say that I've learned a lot. I mean, the fact that you mentioned Ronald Reagan, how could anything change beyond the fact I had him on my program 5 times? There's nothing beyond that. I had Bing Crosby on there, Bing, who I always thought of, Arlene, as being mechanically reproduced. You think of Bing on a record, on a movie screen, on a TV screen, on the radio, but when he walked toward me, flesh and blood, I melted that day, and if anything, that changed me to the extent that it made me just more excited, more naive, more of a kid, because the minute you get blasé, the audience can sense that you no longer generate that excitement, that enthusiasm, then you got to quit. Like I can see in your eyes that you're having a good time. Now, the minute that you lose that excitement. I was on Stanley Siegel's program. Remember the Stanley Siegel?
Sure.
And there was a guest that was very dull, and he bawled out his talent coordinator after the show. I said, Stanley, if a guest is dull, you don't bawl out the talent coordinator. You yell at yourself. You failed, right? Because most authors are making the rounds belligerently against their will. They don't want to make rounds. They want to sit in their ivory tower and write books and make money. But let's say the last couple of books didn't sell well. So the editor says, Charlie, you want to sell books? Got to go on talk shows. So against their will, they go on talk shows. But they don't want to be there, so you got to make them forget. It behooves you to look in the guest's eyes and make them loosen up.
It's not even a question, I think, of the people who have written books who don't want to be in the talk shows. I think that many of them can write well, but aren't comfortable in front of the camera. So even if they want to be there, they're not conveying what in words that they can in the written word.
You happen to be right. That's where the art or the technique of the talk show host comes in. He must make them be as verbal as they are in print. That's his job, to look in their eyes, either hypnotize or mesmerize or something, and make them be as skilled, right?
Absolutely. And you learned so much, but you really learned it yourself. And I want to go back. Joe Franklin, born in the Bronx. I want to talk about how this all developed, how you got so smart. But first we're going to take a commercial break.
Down memory lane, right?
Down memory lane with Joe Franklin. First we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back.
Great.
We're speaking with Joe Franklin. We'll be right back after these messages, so please don't go away. We're back with my guest, Joe Franklin. We were speaking before the break a little bit because I really want to get to know Joe Franklin, not just the people that you've interviewed, because you've become as famous, as I mentioned in the introduction, as some of your guests. You're from the Bronx initially. Now, I hear that your father was the kind of man you were brought up during the Depression who would invite strangers home for a hot meal and a bath.
He was a nice man. He was a reporter on the Mail, a newspaper called the Mail, Ed Sullivan on the next desk. And my father made about $18 a week, and that was big money in the 1939, 1938, 37 period. And he would bring home old, I hate the word bums, but no other word. And I think I got some of that from him, because in my office all day now, I give out 5s and 10s. There used to be entertainers like Fred Allen and George M. Cohan. In those days, they would keep money in their pockets to give out. They'd have a $1 pocket, a $5 pocket, and a $10 pocket, and they'd give out, determined on how important that man was to them, what is known as a handout or charity. And I guess I inherited some of that sentimentality or compassion from my father. He really would bring home homeless people, give them a bath. And my mother would say, "Why do you want to contaminate our bathtub?" But he was the breadwinner, and he was a nice. I thank you for bringing up my father's name. I'm very family oriented, and I miss those days.
Yeah, well, your father, who I understand was an exceptional man, died when you were very young. You were in high school.
Yeah, he had rheumatic fever. He had strep throat when he was a kid. In those days, they didn't have antibiotics, so strep throat automatically left you with a rheumatic heart. But he had a good life. He was a stamp collector, had marvelous stamps. And I guess I got my collecting bug from him. You know, he would all day be hunched over a table, replating blocks of 100 stamps from 1812. And as you know, I collect everything now that's nostalgic.
Yes, that's true. But you started your nostalgia, actually, when you were in your teens. I mean, people think you're an old man today, which you were not.
When I was 25, people thought I was 50, you know. I was born in 1929, the year of the crash. I crashed with the crash. And I got on the radio through a man named Martin Block. Remember that name on the Make Believe Ballroom? And he got me my own radio show, and he says to me, just for a joke, he said, "Joe, don't compete with me." As if anybody could compete with him. He was the king of new records. So I began playing old records. I just, I'd go to a junk shop and buy these old records for a penny. Old Al Jolson's, old Eddie Cantor's, and I'd play them on my show, and I would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, here's a collector's item by Al Jolson. It's worth $500. I'd make up some crazy figure. Then I'd go back to the junk shop the next day to buy more old records, put down 3 pennies. The man would say, "Come back here." I would say, "What do you mean?" to the dealer. He would say, "I heard some guy on the radio last night saying these records are worth $500. So I sort of single-handedly created the rare record market.
Right, made it tough for yourself. But I hear when you were 16 or 17, you had something like 1,000 records at that time. You could buy them 2 for a penny. But did you dream in those days in the Bronx, even when you started collecting, did you dream you'd be interviewing people like Liza Minnelli, Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, the people that we've mentioned? What were your dreams?
My dream was probably to follow in my father's footsteps and be a journalist. But it just happened, I guess everything in life is not really talent, it's luck, right place, right time. I was there when TV was just lighting up in the daytime, 33 years ago. And they asked, TV was on then from 5 o'clock at night until sign-off. They'd begin with Lamp Unto My Feet and end with Sermonette. And they asked me if I could occupy an hour a day in the daytime. I was too dumb to say no. And I guess I was there. So they asked me, what kind of a show would I do? I said, well, how about, because rock and roll was just getting big. And I said, how about a show of kids? This was on Channel 7. It was then WJZ TV. Now it's WABC TV. I said, how about a show of kids dancing to phonograph records? They said, Joe, you're crazy. Who's going to watch kids dancing to records? Who came along? Dick Clark, who today is a billionaire. So I said, well, if I can't do a show of kids dancing to records, I said, how about a show of a talk show, people talking? They said, Joe, now we know you're crazy. The word is television. Got to give them vision, action. Got to give them seltzer bottles, pratfalls, baggy pants, burlesque skits. There was a show called Broadway Open House at that time. Remember with Dagmar and Jerry Lester? So they figured everything's got to be. They said, you can't just have a talk show. I said, well, how about a show of old-time songs with people singing the words? They said, Joe, now we know you're nuts. Now who comes along? Mitch Miller. But anyhow, in the end, I defied them, and I did what I think could have been the first chat show, just nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball. My first guest was Fannie Hurst, wrote a book, a lot of great books, Imitation of Life and Backstreet and Humoresque and Lummox, and I've been talking ever since. I had Eddie Cantor on my first week. Eddie Cantor, that was my thrill.
Has it been a good experience in general? This business has it been good for you?
I really have no complaints. I have enough money to last me the rest of my life if I drop dead tomorrow. But on a semi-serious note, I'm happy. I guess after the big talk show hosts, after your Johnny Carsons, after your Merv Griffins and whoever is big in that era, in that area, I guess that I would come next.
Okay, and a lot of people made it big. I want to talk about some of the people you gave a start to after we come back.
And then ask me later on, do they come back after they get famous?
We're going to talk about that, okay, after we take this break. We're speaking with Joe Franklin. We'll be right back after these messages, so please don't go away. We're back with my guest, Joe Franklin. We were talking about some of the people who are very famous now. Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler in particular. They started on your show.
Barbara was my singer. She was on my show 40 times singing. And Bette Midler, her pianist on my show, was Barry Manilow.
My
and
goodness.
she got her job in Fiddler on the Roof as a result of being seen on my show. She played one of the chorus girls. Then they graduated her to one of the daughters, one of Tevye's daughters. I gave... and Woody Allen was my anchor man. Woody Allen refers to me in all his movies. I don't know if you noticed. In Broadway, Danny Rose, I did a scene, or else he'll show one of my books, or he'll show a TV screen with me on the TV screen. Woody's a great guy.
So he hasn't forgotten you, but some of the other people have. Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler, the superstars, do they come back to Joe Franklin?
Very few. That's a very good point. Very few come back because... kind of a shallow reason, but I guess it's human nature, because I represent to them the time when they were broke. And when they see me, they sort of run away a little bit because they don't want to be reminded. Which I as I say, it's maybe I guess I'd be the same. You can't criticize them. That's their property. That's their privilege. That's their prerogative.
Does it hurt that these people have become such big stars and they don't come back?
No, I'd like to say something poignant and say that it hurts, but I figure I had them on television. That means
Yeah.
and no regrets. I got my money's worth out of them, and now I guess they're very guarded. You don't see these people on too many talk shows anyhow. They're very guarded now. They're sort of protected, and they're insulated from talk shows, and you don't see these people on any show.
Do you prepare? Because I've heard that Joe Franklin just wings it all the way through.
I usually do my research. I read the biographies. I have a few key words in front of me on paper, but that's also a great question. Mine is the only national talk show which is not done on cue cards or on index cards. Whenever you see a talk show and somebody says, "How do you feel?" It says on a cue card, "Fine." There's no ad-libbing. But I've got that theory that if you go to dinner, you don't rehearse the dialogue before you have dinner. You let it flow spontaneously. So at least for me, it still clicks to let it flow 90% spontaneously, 10% on index cards.
And you can see we're being spontaneous here, all hand-lib, all put together, all...
100% I'll vouch for that.
Right.
You are a great interviewer.
Thank you. Joan Rivers, she was on your show. Then she said some things that weren't so nice. What happened with
Well,
her?
no, she tends to get facetious. She said something in the Times I didn't like. She says that if I was interviewing Brazil 66, I would ask them where they're from. Well, I love these little, the Billy Crystal satire of me sort of elevated me to a new cult status, I finally got to see the takeoff, by the way, Billy Crystal.
You did. How did you feel about it?
Because I never see it, because I'm on the radio when he's on TV. I finally got to see a tape of it. I said to the man who played him, I said, one of us is lousy. One of us is terrible. But I loved it. I loved it.
Okay, he looks a lot like you when he does that. You don't take offense when people do that.
Oh, I love it. I've got a big Joe Franklin sound-alike contest happening any minute now at a big club in the village called the Comedy U. So I'm going to be a judge. Bing Crosby was in a Bing Crosby sound-alike contest in 1934. You want to know something? He came in third.
Okay.
He went in there,
You know something? I knew that only from reading your book.
Right.
I also learned from your book how Uncle Milty got his name. And I recommend your book. As a matter of fact, there are two books. I happen to have a copy of two books here. One that's
the bottom
just
one is out of
recently
print, right?
Okay. Well, the bottom one, which you're referring to, is called A Gift for People, which really does talk a lot about you more so. And I wonder why you called it A Gift for People.
No, the publisher gave that title. I didn't give it, but it did well. Did well.
Yeah, did well. Okay, now there's a new book, hot off the press. I had to order it from the publisher, called Joe Franklin's Showbiz Memorabilia.
It's a price guide to collectibles. The word collectibles is now almost parallel with the word antique. Everybody's collecting lobby cards and old LPs and photographs and everything. Nostalgia is a billion-dollar culture.
A billion-dollar culture, something that really helped. How did you become involved? I mean, as a teenager, you were involved. Why? Why old things?
I don't know. I think my idol was Eddie Cantor. And he just, to me, was electric. And I went out and bought old Eddie Cantor records, and then I ran across old records by Al Jolson and Ruth Etting, and one thing led to another. It mushroomed and snowballed and skyrocketed, and I never stopped.
Wow, speaking about stopping, we only have 60 seconds left. It's going too fast. You're married. A little bit more about Joe Franklin.
Got one wife,
okay,
one son.
You met your wife through an ad in the New York Times?
I think I advertised for a receptionist, and then later on she became my boss. We were married on a show called Bride and Groom. Remember that TV show called Bride and Groom years ago?
No, I don't. You were married
Before you,
on television.
Right.
Okay, you mentioned how important your father. You have one son, a son named Brad. And you mentioned, which I am going to, in one of your books, you said that fathers are taught by their children, taught things that in their fight for survival, they have forgotten. Have you learned anything from Brad?
Yes. That I shouldn't have gone into show business. I'm just kidding, but I'm glad he chose not to be in it. It's a rough, heartbreaking game. How I've endured, survived with no political affiliation, nothing except being on the air and being myself is a miracle. I would advise anybody, think twice about this business. It's a rough game.
It is. Well, I thank you very much for being on my show. You were a terrific guest, and I
Please
thank you for taking the
invite me
time. Absolutely. I hope that you have enjoyed getting to know Joe Franklin. I know that I certainly have, and I hope you'll join us again next week. Meantime, good night.